So today we're going to talk a little bit about rates. I think that's on everybody's mind these days, especially in carrier and broker space. It's all about the rates and all that kind of thing. And one of the things I wanted to start out with is, hey, we've talked about negotiation a bunch. That's a common thing that is talked about. But in kind of different types of scenarios, it all kind of goes back to one of the most important things in the transportation industry, and that goes back into relationships and how you can continue to build those relationships and use that to help continue to drive your business forward. So to tell you a little bit about who I am, my name is Robert Rouse. I'm the Senior Product Manager for all mobile products at DAT. I've been at DAT for 9 years, but in that time I've worked directly with brokers and directly with carriers. So I've gotten to see both sides of the business pretty closely. But I wanted to really bring somebody with me today to help everybody understand a little bit from the broker side of the house to kind of understand how these types of relationships can be done really, really well. So I've brought Jeff Starr. Jeff, you want to tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. So my name is Jeff Starr. I'm the Vice President of Marketplace Solutions at Echo. I've been there for about 15 years. First 6 years, I was on the trucking side, talking to trucking companies like yourselves, and really learning how the marketplace works. Spent the next 6 years on the client sales side, talking to customers, helping them build out their networks, and the last 3 years in operations. So recently moved over to our Marketplace Solutions group that's focused on improving our client and carrier experience through technology. So really excited to be here today, talk to you guys about current market, how we're approaching it from a broker perspective.
Awesome. So one of the first things really wanted to make sure everybody had a good way to look at what are the top 3 things that we're going to talk about over the next 30 minutes or so. The first one is communication is absolutely crucial. We'll go into detail about why that's so important. I think there's a misnomer out there that with all the new digital tech that's out there, with all the bidding and booking, that communication is going to go away. And unfortunately, it's the opposite, right? It's going to get stronger, and relationships are going to be even more important for that, and we're going to go into that. The second is differentiating your company through service and reliability. That's going to be huge. We'll go into some details. And then last thing is the more trust that a broker has in you equals higher rates. And we'll go into why that is our scenario. So the first thing to talk about is really diving deep into that communication piece of it, right? So as I was just saying, most carriers that I've talked to over the last couple of years, about 2 years, have literally told me, hey, I'm really frustrated by this bidding and booking. I feel that, I just really want to have those conversations in order to try to drive the rate up or have that communication with the broker to try to get the best rate. And one of the things that I've really tried to help carriers talk about is, hey, bidding and booking and all of those types of features are only successful if you have a great relationship with your broker, right? Because you can trust what they're saying, and there's that communication has already been well established. And so one of the pieces that, Jeff, I wanted to ask you about is what types of communication do you expect for carriers at Echo? Like, how do you want carriers to communicate with your team?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you're first starting out with a trucking company you haven't worked with before, establishing that relationship is key, right? You can offer rates through a website. You can book now through our platform, through DAT1. But ultimately, if you don't know the person behind that rate, it's very tough to build that trust that typically we used to do through every offer, every negotiation, every tracking effort. So communication is a great way to start out that relationship. And then ultimately, even if you're booking loads through a system, still every time talking to your broker and explaining kind of how you're approaching that load makes life a lot easier.
So from your perspective, is calls going completely away, or what's the right time for carriers to for a phone call to be the right place? Or is email also super helpful for your team as well? Like, what's the mix that carriers should think about in trying to help build those relationships?
Yeah, for us, we want to be the easiest to do business with. So we want to deal with text, phone calls, emails, really what's ever easiest for our carrier partners. But there's no doubt that when it comes to a relationship, phone is king, right? If you want to get to know someone, you have to do it over the phone. You can't get to know someone over text, over email. So picking up the phone call, even though a lot of people new to the business aren't comfortable doing it, to me, it's still the foundation of what we do as a business is through the phone.
Awesome. All right, so one way that I'm going to go very brief on is the DAT1 app is something that you're going to see a lot more of that communication happening through the load board products, things like that. As you start to build those relationships and build that trust, we wanted to tell you guys a little bit about how that application can do that. And so basically the DAT1 application is a tool for everybody to use. There's bidding and booking freight in there. There's ways for you to sell yourself to the brokers, right? By posting your truck and putting in very specific information about why you should be the trucking company that they should pick up the phone call and call you right now because they have a hot load that they need to get moved. All of that can be done right from the application. Plus, there's a lot more features that we've added to continue to help with communication through our comment section for brokers. We've added new ways for them to put pickup and drop off hours. All of those details that a lot of carriers have asked for or typically pick up the phone to get, they would then be right there in the application. And so over time, that's going to only continue to improve as we continue to look at new ways for carriers and brokers to communicate through technology, but that's not the only solution as well. All right, so this is one of my favorite things to talk about, especially when I'm talking about drivers. So one of the things that I've talked to drivers about is they get real flustered and like, hey man, I really hate, like there's some brokers that are really giving me a hard time and they're, the relationship's not there. And one of the things that I've always, found from working with carriers over time is like, for the most part, they're kind of understanding, they're like, hey, I'm expecting the brokers to really give me everything. And which is, you guys are a very important piece of the entire puzzle. And so really what I've kind of worked with carriers on is, how do you promote yourself? If I'm a broker, I've been in brokers' offices when it feels like the whole house is burning down because they have really hot loads they got to get moved. All of those brokers had a carrier that they just at the top of their mind go, I know who's going to get this load, right? Because that relationship's been there. They've built that trust, right? And it's really all about promoting why you are different and how you as the specific driver and specific carrier are the perfect person for that load to get that delivered on time, right? And time after time, I've seen brokers just pick up that phone and pick that first carrier that comes to their mind. But Jeff, I want to understand from Echo and help everybody understand, how does that work there? Is that still the case even in the new technology space?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, one of the easiest ways to build trust is consistency, right? If you're working with a broker, if a broker's working with a carrier consistently and they're able to pick up, deliver on time, or even when things go bump in the night, hey, communicate proactively, you can build trust even when things go wrong. One of the harder things is when you're doing that first load, right? So you have no experience with the broker, no experience with the carrier. How do you build trust on that first load? To me, it's simple, honest, clear communication. So, it's not just a rate, right? To your point, you have to say, hey, my driver's going to be empty or I'm going to be empty at 8 a.m. I can be there at 10 a.m. I can haul 44,000 pounds, etc. All the requirements of load are communicated from the broker, and the carrier can communicate on the front end everything that they can do to meet those. And then as long as those expectations are clear on the front end, that trust is set, and then it's just follow through. So I think it's as simple as that, especially when you're doing that first load.
So I think one of the things that I heard from you in our conversations that I thought was super interesting is that for you, the carrier that comes with the plan of how they're going to get that load done is usually the carrier that you feel is going to most trustworthy, right?
Yeah. I mean, obviously rate is king right now. By the way, it's king in every market. When the market was absolutely booming 6 months ago, we were just on the other end of the spectrum. Now, unfortunately, we're going a little bit thinner on rates. It's just where we're at. But once you get past the rate, it's building that trust. And that's one of the easiest ways to do that, right? So I think that's the important piece.
Awesome. So that's one of the things I would really want carriers to understand is when you pick up the phone call, you see a load that's on the load board, and you go, oh, it's picking up in Hunts Point, New York, and it's going out to Seattle, right? So you're like, oh, cool. I know exactly what roads I'm going to go on. I know exactly, I know the Hunts Point area because you've picked up reefer freight there before. All of those things are going to help really settle that broker to go, oh yeah, this guy's going to make sure that they're going to take care of my shipper. It's going to make me look good because I just sent a great carrier out to that specific shipper, and we're all going to be super happy. And that plan is really, I think, just an awesome idea that I think came out of our conversations.
Yeah.
All right. So I wanted to touch a little bit because this is something that's fairly new to DAT. We've been doing it for basically a trial for a little while, but I wanted to talk about what private networks. If you've been using the new DAT apps, you've probably seen a little tab that says private loads. Essentially, what happens is after the brokers actually start building those relationships, they will send DAT a list of carriers that they want to provide those loads to first before they go out to everybody else, right? Brokers are already doing that today. If you go to, Echo has an app. They all do that today. But what we're doing in DAT is allowing you to also see those with the rest of the load boards there. So you'll be able to see, oh, this is one of the brokers I work with often, and here's one of the loads that's coming to me first because of that. Also with the private network loads, you'll be able to accept a book now if there's a rate there that is perfect for you and exactly what you want and you're okay with hauling it. You can quickly, with one tap of a button, hit book now and do that. Or it also has a bidding system as well. So you can go ahead and say, well, that's a little low. Let me see if I can, bid a little bit higher. And then the broker can very quickly respond directly to you. Now, Jeff, I know Echo does use bidding and booking features, and they actually do it on DAT as well.
We do.
You want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, to me, it's, again, going back to that trust piece. When you already have the relationship established, you guys can see the freight that we have. If you're interested, put an offer in right away. If you like the rate that's there, you can book it right away. It makes that experience very easy. You guys get an answer faster, and we got our load booked with little to no manual intervention. So I love this new approach. It obviously doesn't replace the relationship, but it's something that does make life very easy for both brokers and carriers.
Awesome. All right. So this is something we first launched at MATS last year. Over the course of the year, I've gotten great feedback on, so I wanted to really make sure carriers still know that this feature is out there. So one of the tools is a lot of carriers will call and say, hey, I wish some of the loads posted would have more information or things like that. And one of the things I ask them is like, hey, do you post your truck? And they go, nah, I don't really do that. I don't like to get too many phone calls from brokers asking me to do $1 a mile, right? Something that is just not in the range of what you're willing to haul. And I tell them, well, there's a great opportunity with the DAT app where you can actually post your truck and tell the brokers exactly what you want to make, right? So when we talk about this, you can post your truck, publicize that you're ready to go, show brokers, here's all of the information about why you should be the carrier to call, and then post your rate, right? And what I mean by posting your rate is that doesn't mean that, if there's a really hot lane from Chicago to Houston and you post it as $250 a mile, right? Obviously that's going to be a slightly different rate, but at least the broker, when they pick up the phone call, they're going to know, oh, cool, he's at $250 a mile right now. And so if maybe I'm at $2.25 or $2.30, I at least know that I'm in the ballpark before, or they can call all the other carriers, which they have no idea what types of rates they're expecting or what they want. But again, it can be very moved. It's just a starting point in the negotiation.
Yeah, it definitely makes life easy if we know where our carrier partners are at, right? If we've got a baseline that we're starting the negotiation, we can avoid wasting your time with a phone call. But if we're in the ballpark, hey, we can get through that negotiation a little bit faster. So it definitely makes life a little bit easier if you're willing to put that rate out there.
Yeah, it's all. And again, this is just another way for you to communicate your business to the brokers. All right. So the other piece that I wanted to talk to you guys a little about, because it's truly about communication, is tracking, right? So tracking is something that, a lot of carriers have different feelings about. But one of the things that I've really learned as we've gone through this tracking experience over the last several years and really tried to understand what is this all about is it's really just about communication, right? Shippers are requiring different communication levels from brokers and more often. And the brokers are just saying, hey, we need to be able to quickly get that information and get that to the shipper because they're requiring it, right? So one of the interesting things to think about is you can track pretty much everything, right? Like I can track my Amazon order. I know it's 10 doors down and it's going to get here any second, right? Or you can track your pizzas. Everything in the entire country, what we're doing is being tracked. So you know exactly just in time when you're gonna get that product. And it goes all the way up to the manufacturing, right? Because they're not manufacturing thousands and thousands of Nike shoes or pants or anything like that. Instead, they're manufacturing much smaller quantities of stuff and only delivering it and getting more raw goods to make those goods as they need it, so that they're not just holding tons and tons of raw goods that potentially could go bad or get damaged. And so all of that is moving through the supply chain and is becoming more and more important. And Jeff, I just want to ask, how do you guys look at tracking and why is it important to Echo?
Yeah, the industry expectations for track and trace have changed, I think, the most in our industry in the past couple of years, right? It used to be, hey, you need to know if it's going to pick up and deliver on time. That was kind of it, right? If things are going to go bump in the night, let us know. But that was the extent of track and trace. Now the customer expectations are as far as I need to know an update of where my load is for every 15 minutes it's in transit. So whether or not that's a realistic expectation, it's an expectation that's out there. And so everyone's trying to figure out the best way to meet that expectation. The thing that I like from a carrier perspective is I think it's driver's least favorite thing is getting a phone call about tracking the load, right? Expect me to know that I need to pick up this load, I need to deliver this load, and I'm gonna do it as fast as I possibly can because I want it off my truck so I can move on to the next one. So a phone call coming in to say, hey, where are you, is very, very annoying. The nice thing is technology is making that fall to the wayside. So we're now getting to a point where we can leverage ELDs, we can leverage cell phone tracking if you tap into that, where you no longer need to deal with those phone calls. So if you're able to leverage the technology, I advise doing so, and you can avoid those phone calls that distract you from what you're trying to do as a driver in the day-to-day. So I'm excited about it. I know it can be frustrating at times, and there's a lot of new providers and new things you need to think about, but I think it's something that makes our industry a lot better.
So one of the things, as we had conversations prior to this, that really kind of goes back to something we had already talked about is what should a driver do when they know that there's potential that they're going to be late or that something's going to get missed or it may be maybe they're not going to miss it, but it's going to be close. What should carriers do in that instance, and how should that play out?
Sure. It's going to happen, right? It's absolutely inevitable in our business that things are going to go bump in the night. Whether it's truck breakdown, whether it's getting stuck at a consignee, things are going to happen. Best thing you can do in that situation is be upfront and honest about it. And going back to our original point about relationship and trust, you can take a bad thing and turn it into a good thing, right? You can build that trust by something going wrong and communicating that information to your partners. And if you do that, I think you're more likely to even get that next load. Or we talk about maximizing rates. You build that trust. That's a good way to maximize rates because that broker now knows even when things go wrong, you're going to be someone who helps them solve it versus someone who maybe hides it and it leads to more complicated problems down the line.
Awesome. So communication, having a plan, and playing with some new technology.
Yeah.
So this is the other side of carriers is, all of you as a carrier, anybody that's an owner operator, or even if you're a company driver, leased on driver, at the end of the day, who the shipper sees and who all of those other consignees and all of those, you are the face of your trucking company, right? And so everything you do and how you act in a shipper's place is super important, right? One of the things, I had an interesting conversation with a flatbed driver recently, who, was kind of really understanding of kind of how different shippers behave, and kind of he knew things he could do at one shipper, things he couldn't do at another shipper. And one of the things that he said in his 20-something years of driving was he was always amazed that some shippers would literally tell drivers, "Oh, sorry, you can never come back," right? And you can, that driver just isn't allowed back on this facility for one reason or another. And it could probably be stupid stuff for sometimes, but that's super important because at the end of the day, you are the face of your company. So if you're an owner operator, all that is super important. And I would assume from a broker's perspective, that's a call you definitely don't want to have. What about that do you have to add, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, that's the last thing you ever want to hear, right? Is a call from a customer saying, hey, this driver did so-and-so, however it got to that situation, and they ask you to not send that driver, or worst case scenario, not send that trucking company back into their facility. So, you rarely have all the information in that situation, so you have to try to figure out what happened and why. But it's the last thing you ever want to hear. You're right. The drivers are the face of the trucking companies, and ultimately, when you're booking through a broker, it becomes the face of the broker. And so, we try to partner with trucking companies that are going to represent Echo well, represent our customers well. What we love is when we get the call on the other side, right? If you send the same trucking company in multiple times, and the customer calls you and says, "Please keep sending that company in," because that means the customer isn't just sticky with the broker. You're now sticky with that carrier, and that's something you can count on to be consistent, and you can build a business around that. So those are the calls that I like to hear more so than the other ones.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it all comes down to this really great interconnectivity between all the way from the shipper all the way down the supply chain. We all have to work together in order to build those relationships and to really grow that.
Yep.
All right. One of the last things I wanted to touch on, because it really gets into why we talked about all this, because we didn't talk a lot about rates, right? We didn't really get into that much throughout the presentation. We did a little bit at the beginning, but all of that, all this communication and all of the things that we are doing all lead up to, if you're communicating at a high level, if you are providing good information, if you are really delivering on customer service and showing up and being that really great carrier that all shippers love, right? All of a sudden, you are now going to be one of the first people that when that broker has an issue, and brokers have these issues all the time, where they get a shipper that says, it's 11 o'clock at night and I need this thing moved, get me a driver as soon as possible. You then become one of those drivers that's instant in their mind, and that is going to equal a lot more as far as rate, from a rate perspective. They're going to go, yep, I can trust, I know this is going to get done, and that's going to help leverage and help you increase your rates. Jeff, I'm sure, do you have some, maybe a quick story of have you seen that happen at Echo?
Yeah, I can't think of a specific one off the top of my head, but there's no doubt that is 100% true, right? We'll have carriers we book with that do drop a load at the last possible minute, and that puts you in an impossible situation where you're more than likely going to fail a customer. But you do everything you can to avoid it by putting that first call in to the carrier has capacity, and in that situation, typically going to pay a premium rate to make sure that truck gets in there immediately and services that load. The same way we talk about rates, right now for customers, service is king, right? They expect the rates. The rates are going to be where they are, but now service needs to be at 97%, 98%. And so from a broker perspective, we're looking for carriers that can help us deliver on that promise to maximize the rates as much as we possibly can and keep moving until we can get into an up market again and start having the rates go back the other way.
Awesome. Cool. So that's really what we wanted to talk about, is that all that communication, but we also wanted to leave some time for any of y'all that have any questions, want to ask anything about all the cool things that Echo is doing, and we can kind of do that. I'll go here and then, I don't know if we have a mic, but go ahead.
In those situations where
Yep.
Who's paying that? Is the shipper paying that, or you, the broker, paying that extra money to make sure that you don't disappoint your shipper?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the question essentially is,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, in those situations,
Can you repeat the question? So
yeah, that's what I'm trying to
Okay,
do. Yeah. In those situations where a carrier does drop a load at the last minute and you need to find a way to service it, who's footing the bill on that? Well, in those situations, it's Echo, right? If we are paid $1,000 from the customer and we had it booked for $900, but then that's given back to us at the last minute, we now need to pay $2,000 to service that load. That's us taking the hit because we made that commitment to our customer. We're not going to drop the ball. And so that goes back to that relationship and that trust piece because we don't want to take that $1,000 hit. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. Obviously, things happen, trucks break down, and so like that goes back to that communication piece. If it happens, it happens. But if you start to see a trend from a carrier perspective, it's a concern.
all right, you had a question here.
Okay, you're talking about trust and all that kind of stuff. So how much do you use the information on this website called Carrier 411? Because as a carrier, if somebody puts something that's not true and bad up on that, all the other brokers are like, oh, we can't work with you. You did that, and hang up. Or that's all they believe. So I've got to go to the next boss and the next boss and explain what happened with this particular load, and it was wrong, and I waited 6 months and finally got the damn thing taken down. But all the brokers are using this, and we as carriers are getting our name run through the mud on this website. And that's where the trust comes from, because my normal customers, I explained to it, I even gave them copies of everything and got approved. You know, oh, okay, we won't use that. But it's the ones where you're trying to do the one for the first time.
Yeah.
Oh, you're on Carrier 401. Okay,
Yeah.
how do you deal with that?
We try to use multiple data sources. So Carrier 411 is one that we look at. I believe we're also using FreightGuard. And so try to look at multiple data sources. So if you're seeing, again, a trend across multiple sites where it says, hey, there's cause for concern, we have to consider that. But you also have to have that conversation, right? So you have to talk to whoever you're working with at the trucking company, understand the story, and we've got an entire compliance team that's focused on that where you try to sniff out what's reality, because there's no doubt one negative review does not represent a trucking company, and we need to make sure that we're thinking about that when we're bringing on new providers.
Thank you, Allison.
So I guess the question is, how do you prevent that from even happening? Like training the carrier to prevent it from happening. Like what training do you, things that you, I guess you could say you look for, right? The things that you look for to train them, to let them know, hey, these are the things that might happen, have a checkpoint list, versus them saying, hey, they messed up on this delivery, this happened, versus you guys saying, hey, we're gonna train you the proper way, or tell people to train their drivers the proper way so you don't have those incidents happening. You see what I'm saying?
So are you asking more about carrier training approaches in terms of how they train their drivers, or more us explaining our expectations? Or
Exactly, your
Yeah.
expectations, so to prevent that from even happening.
Yeah, it's a new challenge actually that's coming with this automated booking, right? So I think about when I was booking freight 15 years ago, every time I was talking to the driver, I was talking to the dispatcher saying, hey, here's the expectations for this load. Here's what needs to be done. Can you do that, right? You talk about hours, you talk about when's that driver getting empty, et cetera. So you kind of have an opportunity to build that trust, but also set those expectations on the front end, and then you just go from there. Today, with the automated booking, you can communicate as much as you can through the apps and portals. And by the way, we have the same challenge on Echo Drive, our platform, as we do DAT1. But you don't have that manual conversation to give you guys the opportunity to say, hey, here's what's going on with my driver, here's where he's getting empty. So we collect as much info as we can, but I think that's something that's a new challenge that we have to find a way to solve.
So bring that to you real quick. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. My question is for the Book Now that you guys were talking about on the app. who qualifies a carrier? Like anyone can call and give MyMC and book a load. How do you keep that from happening from anyone just taking an MC and booking a load if you're going to do it automatically on
So-
that one or the book now?
Yeah, so I'll talk about how it works on DAT1, and then I'll let you jump in, Jeff. But ultimately, on the DAT1 application and the DAT platforms, the brokers are telling us specifically who they want in their group, right? So they send us a list of all the MCs and all of the people that they said, hey, here's all the list of our contacts that we want in this special group, right? And so they're the ones that are responsible for telling us and giving us that list and managing that list, right? So we're just facilitating that across the board. Now, there are some, like Echo does have on our load board, where it goes out into Echo's platform. So you can book now, and then it takes you to Echo's Echo Drive or their website. And then that's all then Echo will then validate all your information, make sure everything's all what they need in order to make that booking happen. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. But it is a new challenge that's popping up in our industry. I feel like there's a new wave of scammers and fraud that's coming in, and I don't think there's a perfect answer for it yet. What we're doing from Echo's perspective is every time we're inviting a new user, so it's not just from an MC perspective, but from a user perspective, every time we do that, that goes through our compliance team. So they're actually vetting, understanding, hey, is this person who we think they are? And then if so, we invite them and give them access to the app so that they can automatically book. Prior to that, they're unable to. So I do think we have to find a way to do that more systematically, right? Eliminate the manual so we can go fast. But for now, you have to have that manual check.
Yeah, I think in time.
Sorry, hold on. I think your mic cut out for 1 second.
I think in time that will change.
Yeah.
The way that we book freight.
I agree.
With brokers and so forth. But the good old-fashioned phone call.
Yeah.
Always is the best. And even checking out the phone numbers that they're calling in from.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean,
when you sign up.
Yeah, we're seeing some people even buy domains that are a little bit different.
absolutely.
You're seeing the same thing. Yeah, I mean, it's a real challenge. People are getting clever with how they get around
very
it.
clever, yes. And
So,
thank you.
yeah, of course.
Any other questions? Oh, follow up?
Okay, you started talking about tracking, tracking the loads, and I understand that once the driver's under the load, the shipper wants to know where they're at.
Yeah.
Have no problem with that. But when we book the load, they get sent, to their personal cell phones, because we're just a really tiny company, their personal cell phones, the tracking tools. So they don't accept the load till the next morning when they're ready to get under the load. So it's the personal privacy. So that load, when he's under the load, I don't have the problem tracking. It's when he's not under the load, before he even gets to the shipper, how do we change that attitude that the executives want this?
So one of the things that in the DAT1 application that I take very personally as the product manager for that application is we don't do that, right? So what the application does is we have a certain threshold and it says it in the app it could be the broker could request up to 3 hours before the pickup time, right? So whatever time that the broker says, hey, the pickup time's from 9 to 12, right? And he goes, hey, the broker says, hey, 3 hours before that time, that's the most that they can request. That's when we start showing the tracking. So that way we can show, okay, this carrier is now en route to that. But if they accept it and it's for 2 days later, we do not show the broker any of that information until that time period rolls over and it's like, okay, the carrier should be on their way or getting ready to be on their way, right? And so, but the broker can pick a threshold anywhere from 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and so that way we eliminate that specifically from that. So again, it's try to remove that privacy concern for the carriers as well.
Hey, how you doing? My question is for the brokerage. Why is there always a problem when it comes to detention, knowing that it's supposed to come from the customer? I'm guessing, I don't know y'all relationship with the customer, but every time it comes to detention, the broker always says we have to get back with the customer, but the broker is supposed to implement when they sign the carrier when we sign the carrier package that they paid attention no matter if they get it from the customer or not. So why is it always an issue when it comes to getting the attention?
Yeah, I know for Echo, the way that we think about it is whether our customer pays us detention or not, we have the same approach with our carriers across the board. So I'm not saying that that's how every broker does it, but that's the way that we feel it should be done because our agreement's with you regardless if the customer's paying us or not, right? Be a good partner to our carriers. Why is it a challenge? People don't want to lose money, so they want to make sure they're getting paid by their customer. I don't think that's the way that it should go. But I believe that that's where the challenge comes in is they want to make sure that the customer is going to say yes before they pay out to their carrier partners. I don't think that's the right way to do business, but I think that's where the challenge comes from.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any more questions, so I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to thank Jeff for joining from Echo. Really appreciate you being up on stage with us today. And if anybody has any other questions that you think about later, feel free to reach out to me. And Jeff, can they reach out to you anywhere? LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn. You can reach out to me there. I'm available. jstar@echo.com if you want to email me.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks, everybody.